It's time for another thundering brainstorm turned blundering brain fart, pulled from the pages of 100 of the worst ideas in history.
They are priceless, multifaceted jewels of misjudgment. Masterworks of the moronic. Steroid-juiced stupidity wearing a size 10 XX dunce cap embroidered with one simple word. Duh. They are 100 of the worst ideas in history. And this is the podcast based on that popular book and new audiobook. It's a rollicking romp through mankind's historical and often hysterical bungles, stumbles, foibles, faux pas, and F-ups. It's what the kids call these days a laugh and learn experience. I'm your host, Mike Smith, author of 100 of the Worst Ideas in History, and today I'll share two particularly intriguing stories in the realm of scientific screw-ups from my new audiobook. We'll talk about them with my special guest, who's right here, and explore how historically bad ideas like these resonate even to this day. But before we do, let me introduce my partner in our journey into stinkin' thinking, science fiction author Bruce McAllister. Bruce is great at inventing amazing, futuristic scientific scenarios, but I don't think even he could imagine some of the crazy science stories we'll cover today. Welcome, Bruce.
Thank you. It's fun to be here.
Good to be here, isn't it? Okay, let's get into it. Our first story from 100 of the Worst Ideas in History is titled Bones of Contention Pilt on a Lie. Let's give it a listen.
Whopping historical foul-ups and faux pas. Bones of contention pilt on a lie.
The bad idea.
Piltdown Man.
The genius behind it.
Archaeologist Charles Dawson.
The brainstorm struck.
1912.
Bring on the blunder.
Based on the discovery of Neanderthal Man, 1856 in Germany, Cro-Magnon Man, 1868 in France, and Heidelberg Man, 1907, also in Germany, humankind's first steps seem to have been taken on the mainland of Europe. In response, British archaeologists work feverishly to outdo their French and German rivals in an effort to uncover the missing link on English soil. Britain, they believe, must rightfully lay claim to what Darwin terms the origins of man.
From bad to worse.
Propitiously, in 1912, amateur archaeologist Charles Dawson stumbles upon Piltdown Man, ancient skull fragments uncovered in an English quarry that appear to be part man, part ape. Yet suspicions arise. How did the missing jaw suddenly appear at the site 4 years into the dig? Soon, the Royal College challenges Dawson's findings.
Dumb luck.
By the 1950s, as the discovery of Australopithecus africanus points to Africa as home to the earliest humans, scientists come to consider Piltdown a strange, disconnected, evolutionary side road. Then, in 1953, Time magazine publishes evidence that the Piltdown Man fossil is actually constructed of a medieval human skull and the jaw of a 500-year-old orangutan, each stained with chemicals to appear older. Piltdown, it's revealed, has been a hoax. Dawson, now deceased, had been a fraud.
Afterthoughts.
British scientists, in their nationalistic zeal, had been too accepting of Dawson's shaky assertions. As a result, Piltdown Man leads the world's archaeologists down a blind alley that sets evolutionary science back decades. Okay, Bruce, that was quite some story. Can you give us some context? What was the state of archaeology back in the 1900s? Can you share that with us?
They didn't know very much. It would take some decades before the out of Africa theory started up. And so at that point, in the early 1900s, it was very Eurocentric and civilized world-centric. And also there was the assumption that human beings, the most important thing that happened to create human beings out of apes was the size of the brain. So we know differently now. We know about bipedalism, walking on 2 feet, all sorts of things that really were just
opposing thumb and all that kind of good stuff.
Exactly.
How did archaeology become a nationalistic endeavor, even a competitive sport? How did that happen?
Well, it's the human ego, and
right.
What really good scientists know. And most of the things that I think we'll be talking about today, Piltdown man included, is about ego over science. And even scientists can sin as well in the direction of ego, putting their careers, their inflated selves, the ego, above other things. The fellow behind the hoax, Piltdown hoax, Dawson, was a pure amateur. And the problem with amateurs, and I know this because I'm an amateur. I'm an amateur.
Well, we all are here today, so.
As an amateur paleontologist and early man person, that's the way I grew up, I know it's easy if you don't have the exact training, the right training, it's easy to get excited about an idea and then, science will follow. What Dawson did was he wanted the attention. He was a little bit like kind of wannabe soldier. In other words, I'm an amateur. I want the attention. I'm going to make something that people are going to get excited about.
Yeah.
And the Piltdown Man skull is one of my favorite fake fossils because
why is that?
Because it's a medieval skull, medieval man's skull placed on an orangutan jaw with chimpanzee teeth, and that to me captures human beings today perfectly.
But it's interesting to me that at some point during this process, it became something of a contest between countries. There was something in my research I found that Europe really wanted to be the center of where man originated. But that theory began to fall apart over time. Yet there was this zeal to prove it. It's in Germany or it's in England.
Well, not just that. In this story, the Germans and the French kind of backed away and let the British go ahead, even when they had their doubts.
Yes.
And remember the old line, the sun doesn't set on the British Empire?
Yeah, true, yeah.
In other words, this was before Britain's empire tended to come into doubt.
Yes.
And so it was feeling pretty good about itself. And if it could have the first Briton, right?
Yeah.
The first Englishman be the link between apes and human beings, that was good. And this is a little bit like Galileo. I don't want to get into...
Well, in what way? That's interesting.
All right. Well, Galileo got in trouble for putting science above cosmology, and religion played a role in it.
Right. Because he said the Earth was the center.
Yeah.
Or the traditional thinking was the Earth was the center.
It wasn't as if he was talking to other scientists.
Right.
He was talking to people, including the church, who were interested in a cosmology that put other things above science.
Yes.
And Teilhard de Chardin, the Jesuit paleontologist, who was he was accused of being one of the perpetrators of the Piltdown hoax.
Oh, really?
I don't think so. But I do think he was quite interested for the Galileo reasons in having, having, what shall we say, have things orbit around Europe, not around Africa.
And the universe orbit around Earth.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's when there are other values, there are other cosmological values that people put above science, it's going to backfire.
And this is what happens. And as you said, ego plays a big part in this.
Sure does.
Where are we today in our quest to find the missing link? What's the latest science on that?
We are set.
We know?
We are set. Oh, yeah. We have so many fossils now, but not just fossils, we have DNA.
Oh, yes.
The DNA has done more even than the fossils.
Okay.
It's assumed now that we human beings separated from gorillas at 5 to 7 million years ago, and we separated from chimpanzees, who are the closest to us, at about 4 to 5 million. And
so this is settled science now at this point.
Yes, settled science, but it's got very complicated because human beings interbred with not only Neanderthals, but with Denisovans.
Wait, I don't know what those are.
Well, Denisovans were found fairly recently, a bone fragment found in a cave called Denisova, and it was apparently a kind of a laterally evolving human, Homo sapiens. So we have all of that mixed, and it looks like And we have found also Neanderthal bones with DNA in them that show human DNA. In other words, it is so complicated now, but the old questions of, out of Africa is now what is accepted, though what they're now thinking is that it's a multiple out of Africa. In other words,
meaning man originated
in Africa and then spread fast, because the evidence now is that mankind, Homo sapiens, got to the South America.
Oh. How?
30,000. So if you're leaving
How the heck did they do that?
If you're leaving Africa at 50,000 years,
right,
and it's only taken you that long to get to,
right.
So they were doing pretty well.
Is this when Africa and South America were?
No, this is
joined.
They were just. So they took
they were
up
good swimmers.
Studies have shown that if you take, I think it's a group of 30 or 50 human beings, and you put them on a coast. Mm-hmm. And they are living on the coast, and they're eating shellfish.
Yeah.
In 100 years, they'll go 1,000 miles.
Really?
So wait, how long did it take them to leave Africa? Not very long.
Not very long at all.
Yeah.
Wow, that's interesting. I'd like to segue over. Well, actually, before we do, let me ask you one final question. What have we learned from the Piltdown experience? Is it about ego, is it nationalism, science?
Anytime you put anything above science, it's going to backfire.
And speaking of which, I can segue over to, we're going to stay in the realm of archaeology here. And there's the story of the Cardiff Giant.
Yes.
What can you tell us about this? To me, this is the craziest of all.
Well, this is the other one, my second favorite non-fossil, because
it may be my favorite.
It is the simplest. It's the simplest. There's a guy named Hull. He was a tobacconist, and this was, I can't even remember the year. This was 1869, so we're going back before Piltdown Man.
And where are we?
We are in we're in the West.
Okay.
And he has been to a Methodist convention.
Uh-huh.
And he's an atheist. And he's been
What's
hearing...
he doing at the Methodist convention?
Who knows? One's entertainment. And he has been listening to people talk about Genesis and how giants roamed the earth in Genesis.
Sure.
And so to punk these people, and he's got a lot of money.
So this is a willful, knowing...
but it's a punk. I mean, he's punking somebody.
Okay, so he's laughing up his sleeve.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
He gets a 5-ton block of gypsum from Iowa.
Okay.
And has a guy surreptitiously, covertly carve it into a man, including genitals, all right? And
a large man. I'm not talking genitals. I'm talking about height.
Exactly. 10-foot man, a 10-foot tall man. Then he ships it, and everyone has to keep this a secret, to the farm of a guy named Newell in New York.
Okay.
And then mysteriously Newell and his team digs it up, like we're just going to go in the backyard and dig up a man.
So he puts some dirt on it.
Exactly. So he digs it up, and it makes a fortune at 25 cents a viewer. People are coming from all over the United States. Now, we know who P.T. Barnum is.
Sure.
P.T. Barnum, the great huckster.
Sucker born every minute.
Yes. He is so envious. P.T. Barnum is of this that he
of the Cardiff Giant.
Of the Cardiff Giant, that he wants to buy it from the owner, from Hull. Hull refuses, and in a fit of pique, P.T. Barnum makes his own replica. And then, of course, how things get crazy. Newell tries to sue him for making a fake of a fake, and the judge just said, "You got to be kidding." So apparently both of them made lots of money with their fakes.
Did Barnum know or care that it was a fake to begin with, and he's making a fake of a fake?
He didn't care.
Because there's a sucker born every minute. He just wanted to display something unusual.
And the interesting thing is that line which I grew up thinking it was P.T. Barnum. It was said about P.T. Barnum's attempt to buy the fake.
Oh, that's where it came from?
Yes.
Oh, fantastic. So I've been quoting it here not knowing that.
Well, no, I'm the same way. It's both true and not true. So it's a fake.
So it traveled the country under the P.T. Barnum circus, Barnum and Bailey circus.
Later it traveled. It sat lying on the ground in Newell getting 25 25 cents a viewer.
And people would pay, and they'd say, wow, that's a really large man.
Remember, 1869, and that's something else. I don't have a lot of time to talk about this, but remember, a lot of scientists were naturalists. They didn't have PhDs in molecular biology back then. They were naturalists. So the first geologist, again, why is a geologist looking at a fossil man? Shouldn't it be a paleontologist?
Yeah.
No, but in that there weren't any specialists.
There was not such a thing back in those days?
Not in that, not in the sense that we know it. So the first geologist to look at it says, this is not a petrified man. And then, of course, what does he say next? He says, this is probably a statue carved by a 16th or 17th century Jesuit sculptor to impress American Indians. And it's like, good Lord. So back in those days, the science wasn't even any good.
Right. So the hoax was fabricated even further by
exactly.
evaluation.
Even the scientific evaluations were bogus.
Oh, my gosh. Well, we need to break right here, but when we come back, Bruce and I will be kicking the heck out of another well-intended idea that went terribly wrong from the world of science. It's colossally bad concept number 43, taken from the new audiobook, 100 of the Worst Ideas in History. We call it The Toad That Ate Australia, and we'll get into that when we come back.
Dwayne's do-it-yourself airline was a bad idea. The Whip-Nickel-Ton Rodeo was a bad idea. The business suit, bathing suit, also a bad idea. But they're strokes of genius compared to 100 of the worst ideas in history. The hysterical new book that answers the question, hey, wouldn't it be fun to laugh at the foibles, faux and F-ups of some of the world's most famous people, corporations, and institutions, and in so doing, feel smart, superior, and super cool yourself? Well, yes sirree, Happy Whiskers. In 100 of the worst ideas in history, you'll meet the U.S. president who starts each day skinny dipping in the Potomac. Get an earful of the hit singing group that can't really sing. Ride with the confused chauffeur who starts a world war. Munch on the tasty new snack food that might just give you anal leakage. Encounter the giant toad that nearly ate Australia. Plus, the Octobomb, fashion frock-ups, silly cinema, and so much more of so much less. It's Stinkin' Thinkin' from the world of news, politics, sports, business, entertainment, and pop culture from the near and distant past. And it's more fun than flossing your hippo with a chisel. No bull slip. You're going to flip over 100 of the worst ideas in history. Beat the crowd and get your copy today.
Available online and at these fine stores.
Get the new audiobook now at audible.com.
We're back. Mike Smith here, author of 100 of the Worst Ideas in History, with fellow author Bruce McAllister. We're ready for the next story, so before we discuss how in the world this bad idea came about, let's listen to it as pulled from the audiobook.
Mad scientists and the monsters they create. Mr. Cane Toad's Wild Rise.
The bad idea.
Import a fat, poisonous, voracious toad to rid your sugarcane crops of pesky beetles.
The geniuses behind it.
Farmers in Cairns, Australia.
The brainstorm struck.
1935.
Bring on the blunder.
A swarm of sweet-toothed beetles is chomping away at Australia's sugarcane crop. So, by cracky, local farmers come up with the perfect solution. Introduce 102 toads from Hawaii to scarf up the bothersome beetle population. Problem solved, eh, mates? Not quite. Our outback sugar farmers failed to realize an important rule of amphibious physics. Beetles can scurry safely to the top of the cane plant, where the heavy, dinner plate-sized cane toads can't reach. Thus begins one of the worst ecological calamities in Australian history.
From bad to worse.
As the cane beetles continue to destroy the sugar crop unchecked, the poisonous toad behemoths eat virtually everything else in sight. Some grow to over 2 feet in length, tip the scales at more than 6 pounds, and live up to 35 years before croaking. That's bad, but this is worse. with females producing over 50,000 eggs per year. The cane toads soon displace rabbits as the island nation's biggest pest, rummaging in home trash cans, bushels of grocery store produce, restaurant pantries, home cupboards, and more. Meanwhile, thanks to their poisonous innards, they cause the death of thousands of birds, snakes, dingoes, and crocs that dine on them.
Dumb luck.
Today, the Australian cane toad population tops 200 million, with no solution in sight. Recently, a $50 per toad bounty has been posted, and one of the country's richest men has offered a glass of beer for every bag of dead toads delivered.
Afterthoughts.
The latest hope for cane toad eradication is a meat-eating ant native to Australia, which can be lured into toad habitats using, of all things, cat food as bait.
Okay, Bruce, we heard the story of the cane toad. It's pretty amazing. How in the name of sugar cane could this happen? Is it desperation? Is it ignorance? Is it bad science? How could this occur with such a well-intended premise?
It was a time when people thought pretty simply, and unfortunately it was very recently.
Yeah, it's not that long ago.
If a toad eats beetles, then we can bring it in.
Right.
If a mongoose eats rats, we'll bring a mongoose in. And in other words, we did this again and again. It was kind of the living biological equivalent of DDT. In other words, you don't see the consequences.
Right.
But this is what human beings are terrible at. They don't understand evolution.
Yes.
If you have a toad that has survived Central and Latin America and all the predators there.
And they're big and they're heavy and they're poisonous.
Well, they're mainly poisonous. Their tadpoles are poisonous and they reproduce faster than rabbits.
Yes.
You might want to look into that before you bring them to a place that has nothing that will eat it. Because
that already has a rabbit problem, by the way.
That's exactly right.
Yes.
In Australia, it has impacted not only the populations you'd think, but lizards, snakes, dingoes, I mean everything, because it's so poisonous.
Oh, they're eating it and or picking it up and getting
poisoned. But this is typical. If it's a little bit, there's a famous science fiction writer named Harry Harrison, and he has had a series called Death World, where absolutely everything was poisonous on it. This is the toad from Death World. But we always do this. We will bring in something, and there was in South America a bird. It was 8 feet tall. It was kind of like an ostrich, but with a T-Rex head.
Right.
And it was called the terror bird. And it was the only carnivore.
Okay. This is real. This is not a fake.
This is real, and this was back in the Miocene, if memory serves. Well, that's because the saber-toothed cats hadn't come across the Bering Straits to North America. And once they arrived, the poor terror, it was like, so what does this mean? It means that Australian farmers should import
saber-toothed tigers
to somehow save the terror bird. No, it doesn't work that way. So, in other words, in terms of evolution, it's happening all the time.
Now, so that was pretty much the state of pest eradication back in 1935, as you bring in a predator.
Yes, exactly.
There was no DDT, as you pointed out, no other pesticides. But unfortunate consequences can occur. Now, do you think that the fact that the toads are poisonous, reproduce prolifically, and are an ecological nightmare, so was that accepted or just not known? Or not cared about?
I think you're right. It's that they didn't care.
Okay.
Well, they didn't know how important it was. It was that simple thinking, which is you bring in cane toad. Cane toad eats beetles, and of course, what they discovered in Australia was the cane toad. Who's ever heard of a climbing toad?
Right.
So the toad is at the bottom of the sugar cane.
Yeah.
And the beetle has managed to flee to the top, and so the toad's looking at it, and
So they got into everything.
Failure.
They got into everything else. From what my research said, is that the toads became the thing you saw when you opened a cupboard at your house, or in a garbage can.
Because who would want to be
crossing
around
the road?
Yeah, no, they're
everywhere.
Totally toxic.
My gosh. So
to answer your question, it had to be, they might have heard about those things, like the poison and the reproduction, but it didn't seem important to them.
And this was an expedient way to maybe solve a very pressing problem. When it comes to pest eradication in farming and around the home, where are we today? We're not importing giant toads anymore.
Well, and we're not doing DDT anymore.
And we're not doing DDT.
Though
that's in the book, too, by the way.
Horror, yes. That's one reason I'm mentioning it. There are horror stories now.
Yeah.
It appears that there may be, off the island of Catalina in California, in the water, 500,000 rusting drums of DDT.
Is that right?
In other words, the consequences, Rachel Carson was right, but she had no idea how
Silent
long.
Spring.
Yes, how long the consequences would last. So fortunately, today, we are in an era, we're still going to make mistakes in the labs, but we're in an era where non-toxic pesticides, so this is why you might get your house sprayed with orange oil.
I have had that, yes.
Yes, all right. You can't have it tinted with orange oil, but you can have it
right.
All right. So that's emblematic of the move. Also, we are doing quite a bit with genetic engineering, like GMO.
Okay, yes.
All right, so genetically modified fruit flies, where they are sterile males to mate, and then, of course, nothing happens
after that. Yeah.
So some of this is pretty Frankenstein, chilling in the sense that there may be some consequences.
Well, playing with genetics is always chilling, I think. No,
but at least we've moved away from the simple-minded DDT. If it kills the thing, good.
Yeah.
We're a little more wonderfully paranoid.
Now, allegedly, my research showed that even today, and I think DDT has been banned since the 80s, 70s? Somewhere in there?
72, I think 72.
But all of us still have some element of DDT in us.
And it's like heavy metals in fish and all of that.
My God. We have time, Bruce, for one more story, and this is one of my favorites, having grown up by the Great Lakes. There's the story of the Asian, and I've never seen, I don't think, to my knowledge, jumping out of the water or felt or been impacted by the Asian carp leaping their way across the Great Lakes today. But share that bad idea, if you could, with us. How did this happen?
All right.
What is it? How did it happen?
In the 1970s, some Asian aquaculture farmers. Now, what that means is that they're fish farmers, they grow fish. It's like salmon that is farmed as opposed to salmon that's out in the wild. And they knew from China, whether Chinese or Chinese American, whether they were recent immigrants, whatever, they knew that the carp was a cool fish to have to clean things. Because it's vegetarian. It doesn't
feeder kind of a thing?
No, it's not a carnivore. It doesn't eat your baby fish.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so it just eats the junk. Yeah. All right, the flora, the bacteria.
Sure.
So that must have been a good idea. Mm-hmm. Well, these aquaculture farmers were in Louisiana.
All right.
And it didn't occur to them, of course, the consequence there was, what if they escape into the Mississippi River?
What did they want them for to begin with?
Just to clean things? Just to clean. It would be the equivalent of like a robot vacuum cleaner, So they just wanted that, and then some, as always happens, escaped.
Yes.
Now, the way I view it, as I've told you, is that before allowing these fish in, even just to clean, we should have looked at Chinese culture.
Okay.
Chinese culture views the silver carp as like the epitome of persistence, strength, and in fact, in mythology, that carp is able to jump over the dragon's gate into the palace of heaven. It's like we should have looked at that. Now, is that science? Well, you could say that's anthropological science, which is the Chinese knew something we needed to learn, which is this is not a fish. They now think that the fish jumps because there's so many of them. In other words, good God!
Wow.
So
these
now
are
it's
all over the Great Lakes.
It's all over it's all over wherever the Mississippi could reach. So the Ohio River, and of course the Great Lakes are terrified, and they have built electric gates, meaning electrified water, and these things are huge. I mean, they can be huge.
You're telling me they jump and they actually can hit?
They can hit you, knock you out of your canoe, and in some fish and game, people have been knocked off the wharves trying to fix the the electrified fences in the water. Now, what's interesting, there's a disgusting rodent disgusting rodent.
Is there any other kind?
Well, this one's particularly disgusting.
Yeah.
In Louisiana, called the nutria, and it was introduced, and State of Louisiana has had this campaign, how to eradicate the pest by cooking it, turning it into purses. And, of course, same things happen with the cane toad. I have ordered, in fact, from eBay, a coin purse made from a cane toad.
Is that
so you
right?
know, I will give it to you as a present.
Thank you very much, and maybe we'll make it available to our listeners here. If they're, the first caller or something can get a free one. Well, let's do this. We need to take a break right now, and we'll be back in a moment to wrap things up.
It's time for another thundering brainstorm turned blundering brain fart, pulled from the pages of 100 of the worst ideas in history.
We call this entry The Butt of a Fat Joke. And this is a quintessential American story because it involves a well-meaning company addressing perhaps the biggest concern facing Americans back in 1968, and maybe even more so today. And that concern is, how can I shove unlimited quantities of fatty snacks into my face without making my arteries harder than yesterday's linguine?
Well, the foodies at Procter & Gamble back in the late 60s have the answer. Olestra. It's a new chemically contrived fat substitute, which means we can now consume vast quantities of potato chips, cookies, crackers, fat-free and worry-free.
One problem. Olestra is soon linked to acute digestive illnesses. A short time later, the federal government mandates that all Olestra products carry a warning label that includes the possibility, upon consuming these products, of abdominal cramps, diarrhea, and a bizarre malady they term anal leakage.
After an initial surge of public excitement, Olestra product sales dropped by 50% within 2 years. More than 20,000 consumer health complaints are lodged, and its promise of delivering guiltless snacking becomes, as we say in the book, one big fat joke. Yet Olestra can still be found in the marketplace today. It's used as an ingredient in deck staining products and machine lubricants, so you know it's good for you.
499 other examples of hysterical, stinking thinking from the past. Pick up 100 of the worst ideas in history. Beat the crowd and get your copy today. Available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Goodreads, 100worstideas.com, and better retailers everywhere.
Get the new audiobook now at audible.com.
So that's it for this episode of the 100 Worst Ideas in History podcast. I'd like to thank Bruce McAllister for his wit and wisdom. In that order, by the way, wit and wisdom. Bruce, what's your latest book, and where can our listeners find it?
Well, thank you for inviting me to plug one of my
I didn't really
novels.
invite you. You just sort of showed up today, so
Yeah, exactly.
it happened the way
you
it
didn't
happened.
know we were going to be doing this together. What I'd like to plug is actually a fake memoir that I have written.
Well, that's in keeping
Is
with...
that in keeping?
That's
or
in
what?
keeping with our
They're
theme
not
today.
called fake memoirs. They're called faux memoirs or fantastic memoirs. And
Well,
it's
it
called The
sounds
Village Sang to the Sea, a memoir of magic.
And where can we get that book?
Amazon.
Amazon has that? Fantastic. Well, that's the law. Amazon must have every book
Otherwise,
ever.
I don't exist.
That's right. It just, no one else has it. I also urge everybody to pick up Bruce's book, of course, and the new audiobook version of 100 of the Worst Ideas
Which
in
is
History.
Excellent. The
Oh, well, thank
production
you.
values
Here's
are
an
incredible.
unsolicited review right here.
We did. This is not a shill activity.
And you can get that at Audible, iTunes, or Amazon. And join us again next time, if you will, when we attempt to answer the age-old question, what were they thinking? We'll see you then.
499 other examples of hysterical, stinking thinking from the past. Pick up 100 of the worst ideas in history. Beat the crowd and get your copy today. Available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Goodreads, 100worstideas.com, and better retailers everywhere.
Get the new audiobook now at audible.com.